Hi, this is Anthony Metivier, and I'm here with Luca Lampariello, and we are doing a very special interview. We're here in Berlin. Well, I live in Berlin, but Luca's visiting,
Yep.
and we thought, well, I'm the memory guy, he's the language learning guy. We both operate in the same sort of industry, so to speak, because his business is memorizing words, and my business is helping you memorize them. And well, it's really not a business; it's more like a passion. And
Yeah.
as for people who don't know you, you've got dozens upon dozens of videos on YouTube that train people in a particular brand of language learning. But for people who do know you, which I think probably many, many people who are watching this already do, one thing I've noticed is that we have never heard much about your personal life. And I mean, I don't even know if you have
You need to pry, yeah? Yeah, you don't know the real secrets.
the real stuff, like the dirt. You know, like for one thing, well, it's not dirty unless it is. I've never asked you if you have a middle name.
Yeah, actually my name is Luca. Everybody calls me Luca, but my other name is Vittorio because my grandfather, that's my grandfather's name, and the Italian tradition is to call a son or a daughter to after your grandmother. It's an old tradition coming from the south. I don't know if it's the same thing in Canada. So. My grandfather's my father's he's actually my father's mother, and his name was Vittorio, and was he was a physician, a doctor who used to work for. He used to be in World War II, unfortunately, and he was in Africa. And I'm fortunate. I've never got to meet him. But my mother told me he had very interesting stories, to tell about World War II because, one of the things I like the most apart from languages is history. So,
did any of those stories survive that you remember from your grandmother?
Yeah, no, I remember a lot of things that my mother told me, but but not only my grandfather, actually, my other grandfather as well, and my grandmother. They I got to know my two grandmothers, and they were telling us about what happened in World War II. One is from Calabria, which is deep south. The Americans and the Allies invaded Sicily and then went up to Calabria. And my other grandmother comes from a very Cividale, which is in the north of Italy. So I just got the whole family from everywhere in Italy. So I have all these different traditions and also dialects. One thing that I never say is that my grandmother, when I was a little kid, just talked to me in Calabrese dialect. So I learned that as well. Yeah.
Wow, so that's a lot of different parts of Italy, but I know you to be living in Rome at the moment. Is that where you were born?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was born, and I've been living there for 34 years almost, because I'm turning 34 actually in 2 days.
34 in 2 days.
34, I'm an old man.
Well, happy birthday in advance.
Thanks.
And
Thanks.
But you've also lived in Paris?
I lived in Paris for 3 years. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I lived in Paris and in Barcelona.
Okay, so the three places. What strikes you as being some of the major similarities and the major differences?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Barcelona is very similar to Italy. The weather, the people, the traditions. I always say that Spaniards are a little bit like our cousins in a way, because I believe that the language is like part of the culture, and our languages are very, very similar, and that reflects a certain kind of mentality. Paris, on the other hand, the French are similar to the Italians in so many ways, but at the same time they're different. Paris is like a northern European city, and the weather is kind of different. It's a little bit chilly there, like here in Berlin. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's now in Berlin it's not as cold as I thought. It's like 6
plus
degrees.
6.
Plus 6. It's just I'm kind of liking it. A month ago I was in Russia and I expected it to be minus 20, and it was plus 8. And now it's plus 6, so I might bring good weather, or maybe I'm just lucky. I tend to lean towards the second. I have to say that the French and the Spaniards and Italians are very similar in so many ways. It's not easy to pin down these things because you have to live to understand. But basically, I also believe that the language plays a huge role, and the way, and obviously history. But we're all Latin peoples, so to say. So there is a common trait to our culture and the way we eat food and et cetera, et cetera.
Now you mentioned history as one of your interests. What interests you about history?
Well, Everything interests me, and the thing that interests me the most is that if you know history, I feel that you know history, you know the world you're living in right now, because we've been shaped. We're the product of history. We're the product of something that of all the things that happened in the last 4,000 years, actually in the last million years. What interests me the most, if you want to be more specific, is World War II. Because I find it, might be a little bit maybe naive to say that. It's really like I see it as a clash between the good and the evil, even if, sometimes when you think of it, the Allies bombing German cities and so many people dying, is that good? Or does that serve a specific purpose? Or was it strictly necessary? Yeah, obviously it served the purpose of defeating Nazi Germany, but at the same time, was it strictly necessary? This is like we're not going to delve into politics, but I'm very interested in like how it was possible that all that thing happened, and the fact that we're living in a I wouldn't go so far as to say that we're living in a peaceful world. That is not true, but at least in Europe, if you think about it, that's the longest period we've had peace. 7 years. If you think about it, Europe has been ravaged by war for centuries, and there's never been a period longer than, I don't know, never been like 70 years, so we're lucky. In Canada as well, there's been peace for a long time, so we have to consider ourselves lucky. We take it for granted, but it's not granted at all. If you consider all the wars actually right now in Syria and in many other places in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you about some of your other interests, but just not to abandon this for a second, what do you think that the capacity for language learning has been involved in the peace that has developed over time, not just in terms of as if anybody has any better abilities now to learn languages, but the spread of language training, both hard copy things and online? I
believe so. I believe that, for example, if we had a war right now, it wouldn't be the same. And people have a lot of, they're biased in so many ways. For example, the Italians tend to, not all Italians obviously, they tend to think that the French are a little bit snobbish, or, the Germans are a little bit closed-minded. It's absolutely not true. The fact that we live in a peaceful society right now, talking about Europe obviously, has so many. For example, yesterday I was at a party and there were so many people from everywhere around the world. Turkish people asked me, you could talk about anything, and people want to mix. There's not this okay, you're a foreigner. No, you're part of a European community. And this has revolutionized, I would go so far to say that has revolutionized the way young people, this young generation is learning languages. Think about it. I don't know if you ever heard of the Erasmus project. Basically, it's, I don't know, Canadians and Americans might know about it, but it's a European thing, where a student can decide to live abroad and learn a language. It's not just because they go study there. Okay, obviously they go study there, but the people who went there just completely changed their way they see their own country and their own existence and their own traditions, etc., etc. So I do believe that the peace has contributed enormously to the development of this multilingual society in which we live in. And this is a fantastic thing. Obviously, the internet plays a huge role as well, but I do believe that the peaceful conditions in which we live do play a huge role in the way we live and we consider the reality around us.
Okay, so we got history and we got language, and it seems that they're tightly wrapped up in one another. Do you have an interest that you would say has nothing to do with language?
Yes. Before I talk to you about my other interests, I just wanted to say that for me, when people talk to you, for example, talk about you and talk to you, say, oh, you're the memory guy. They refer to you as the memory guy, right? Mm-hmm. And you refer to yourself as a memory guy. But the thing is that, and when they talk to me, the first thing that they want to know is how many languages I speak. And the people who already know me treat me as, friends as well. They talk about, we talk about a lot of things, but mainly they think that my main interest is languages. Now, actually, languages is one of the things that I like, but it's not just the only thing I do. When I think about history, for example, I'm very interested in World War II and specifically the Eastern Front, what happened between Nazi Germany and, for example, the Russians. And that helped me, delve into this that actually sparked this interest in understanding how the Russians saw the war. And I've been reading a lot of books in Russian and a lot of books in German to understand how the two parts lived the war. So this is just one event in the course of history, but there are many other events which actually push me to read more and more in the languages, which are spoken in the countries that were involved in the political historical processes that I was trying to understand and read about. So history has actually contributed as other interests to perfect and improve my language skills. And to go back to your question, as other interests that had nothing to do with languages, sports. It doesn't necessarily have to do with languages unless you want to read a blog about running, for example, in English or in other languages. But sports is one other thing that really interests me. If I think about it now, for example, I really like movies, but this has to do with languages, right? So I'm trying to find something that has nothing to do with languages. I would say sports. I like jogging. I've been trying to jog. I decided to jog. In 2003, I decided that I want to try it. I don't know. Have you ever run? Have you ever tried?
I have actually. Unfortunately, I developed arthritis in my knees, so I can't run. But I did run quite avidly as a young person. So.
And also football. I used to play football a lot, as well as with my twin sister. She's a professional now. So this is for example one of the things that I'm interested in that has, I would say, everything potentially has to do with languages, because language is the way we convey our thoughts. But yeah, sports is one of the things I'm interested in, and that's it.
Well, the sports thing is very interesting, I think, because there is a phenomenon of joggers high, and actually I've interviewed you before, and you mentioned the relationship between joggers high and language learning as a kind of finding the zone or finding a spot where things really start to come together and happen. And you mentioned that also in your masterclass.
Absolutely.
And what I wonder, a question that I'm thinking is, and I'm not sure exactly the best way to elaborate it, but one thing I work on is meditation and finding this clear spot without thought, without thinking. And well, maybe that's not the best way to say it, but a place where thought is so focused and intent that it's sort of beyond language or one word. And I'm just wondering, as someone who has dealt with so many languages and found mastery in so many languages, how do you get silence in your head? Is it just through running, or do you have any other kinds of personal practices?
That's a very interesting question. I've been thinking about meditation a lot recently. I've never done it, but I've been hearing more and more people actually trying to meditate because they've been, overwhelmed by life. Sometimes we are overwhelmed by life, myself. And you were right when you say sometimes I got a storm of languages or thoughts, and I think one of the most difficult things to do is actually to find a moment where you're not listening to anything, not even to your inner voice. You're just a piece of yourself. And I find it a very difficult thing to do because we live in a world where we get stimulated continuously all the time. So this is one of the things that I actually want to try, because I've never tried it before. I think that going back to the running thing, you are right that when I run, I think better for some reason. I like, maybe chemically, because you got a lot of, chemical substances like serotonin, and we release substances when you run. And I'm more relaxed, when you go back home, you take a shower, and you're at peace with yourself and with the world. But at the same time, you still have this flux of thoughts and memories. Is still that even before, I don't know if it ever happened to you, that you try to sleep and you have so many things so many things in your head, whirlwind of things that you can't concentrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is the next frontier. The next thing that I want to try to achieve is actually silence. Might be strange for a polyglot or a multilingual person who loves speaking so much, because I do like speaking, but actually this is one of the things that the New Year's Eve resolutions.
Well, I'm working on a book right now, actually, called How to Fall Asleep, and I'll hook you up with a copy after. And it gets into meditation and things called shavasana and different strategies that you might be interested in.
I have an article. I have an article on my blog myself It's a guest post by my friend Joseph. He's Swedish, who actually gives very valuable advice as to how to sleep, because some people just can't sleep. Insomnia is one of the biggest problems. People don't talk about it that much, but actually there's a lot of people who can't sleep, and not being able to sleep is a terrible thing.
That's another thing that has come up. When I've spoken to you before, you've talking about being with Richard Simcott, and how the story of him staying up so late at night and just being fascinated
Leafing through the books.
and just not stopping. How do you, given all that you do and all that's required of your brain power, how do you manage to do so much and also be well rested? You're obviously a very fit and healthy guy, so
fit. I don't know about fit, but healthy. Yeah.
But I mean, how what's with sleep and your ability to retain and working memory and all these kinds of things that are required for learning a language?
I'll give you one very simple question. Answer, not question. My answer would be that I manage to speak and maintain languages because I live them every day. I found the best environment for me. People think about, there's a lot of people who focus on the best method, the best approach, and then they focus on getting the materials, etc. But I believe that the human factor is one of the most important things. Language has been created in order to communicate, right? We convey thoughts through language, and if you find the best conditions, your brain and your capacities are going to thrive. So what I did is I told myself, while I was, I started speaking more than 3 or 4 languages, I told myself that the only way I could maintain so many languages at a certain level was to live them. On the one side, you can structure your day so that you can, for example, listen to the radio when you're washing the dishes, or you can read books. But that's time you choose to spend on the languages. But on the other side, if, for example, you live in a city like Berlin or Rome or Paris, and you surround yourself with, what I call the microenvironment, with foreigners, you live with foreigners, you go out with foreigners, you tend to speak languages all the time, right? Currently, for example, I'm living with my friend David. He's from London. You know him, and a Dutch girl, and that allows me to speak Dutch and English on a daily basis. So I also go out very often with a lot of friends who live in Rome, and I tend to speak other languages. I have a lot of friends everywhere, and I tend to, so on the one hand, in real life, I have this microenvironment where I speak 2 or 3 languages at home, plus when I go out, I speak languages, other languages with other people, with my friends, and I work with languages. As a language coach, what I do is basically I give classes in the language, about the language, but also about the structure, how to organize your time, etc., etc. And I do it in various languages. For example, in all sorts of possible combinations. For example, Americans want to learn Spanish. Spaniards want to learn English. Italians want to learn English. Americans want to work to improve their Italian. And so on. So from Russian into English, English into Russian. So I got to practice a number of languages, on a daily basis. And one of the best ways to learn is to teach. If you teach, you learn a lot because, and I guess it happened to you as well. You're trying to figure out ways to help as many people as possible, and this means that you're going to do some research and you're going to apply it to yourself. So you're going to understand the process better. And this is exactly what I've been doing in the last 5 years, trying to figure out ways to help as many people as possible figure out their best way. So it's not only a psychological growth, because you have to understand people's better. It's not just people better. It's not just that a good language coach and even a good language teacher doesn't necessarily have to speak the language perfectly, but has to have the capacity of understanding the person, the student's needs and tastes, etc., being able to relate to him. And I think that the psychological process, I've said it a number of times, is absolutely important to thrive in language learning, because without the psychological aspect, you can try to nail everything, but things probably will not work.
So speaking of coaching, if I were to come to you and say, Luca, I want to coach and I need that personal attention from an individual because nothing else is going to work, What is the first thing that you're going to say to me in response, assuming that we go through the mechanical stuff of transactions and filling out forms, and getting a stamp at the Luca Lampariello registration office? Assuming we got there, what's the first thing that you'll say?
The first thing I will say is, why do you want to learn this language? First, I'm going to ask you about the reasons why you're doing this, and then your personal story, your personal history, insofar as language learning is concerned, and I'm going to ask you about yourself. What do you do? What your interests are? So first of all, it's about trying to figure out who you are, what you want, why you want it, and all the lessons are tailored around your tastes and needs, and I take into account what kind of person you are. For example. Let me give you a very concrete example. If you are a very shy person and you have difficulties, expressing yourself for some reason, the very first thing that I'm going to do is focus on the things that you are good at. For example, reading or listening, and small tests to get out of your comfort zone. I'm not going to talk to you immediately. Just okay, we're going to have this conversation in the language right now, because it might be detrimental, actually, So the very first thing that I do is to try to understand your, language experience does count, because I've noticed that the people who have never learned a language before, and maybe they're in their 50s, struggle a little bit more than people who say have learned another language. But it's not just about language experience. It's a multiple factors that play a role, and you have to try to tackle every single aspect and try to do it from the very beginning. Now,
you mentioned people who are in their 50s, and you've said before, and you mentioned in your masterclass, that actually we often make the mistake of saying that children have some special advantage in language learning, and older people are thought to struggle more than children. But you kind of have an interesting take on that, and if you could say something about that kind of paradox about age and language learning.
It's a paradox because first of all, I don't believe, this might sound absurd to a lot of people who have been claiming that the acquisition of your first language is different from the acquisition of a second language. I believe that the mechanisms and the way we learn languages as adults or kids are almost the same. There are differences in the way our brain is wired. That's true. It's true that in a way a kid's brain develops fast, and it's a little bit different psychologically. They want to blend in. So what they do is they tend to play with their schoolmates, etc. They develop the language in a certain way. But if you think about it, I've met in my life, I've met adults who speak foreign language, extremely well, because, for example, they lived in the country for 30 years and they have family. Let's suppose a French guy living in the Czech Republic, and he moved there maybe 30 years ago, and he's been speaking the language ever since, and he's got a family, and he speaks to his kids in Czech, to his wife Czech. He might have an accent, but he might develop the nuances that are, characteristic of a native speaker. So I lived in France for 3 years. I've learned so many things, not just about the language, the way they talk, the way they move their mouth, or that the French have. If I spoke French, I would say, bon alors, on y va. Donc, so these are not things that I actually do when I speak English. It's a very different thing. But anyway, but I digress. What I wanted to say is that basically I think that any person who speaks a foreign language. Any person who speaks his native tongue well can learn any language. Think about it. As a native speaker, you can hold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words, hundreds of thousands of combinations of words and expressions, and it's amazing. I strongly believe that our capacity of learning anything is not infinite, but is huge. If you think that we have more neurons than there are, stars in the sky, there are millions. I don't know. It's a mind-boggling number. So I believe that you can accomplish anything in life if you put yourself in the right circumstances, conditions, etc. Your brain is literally, and your capacity is really going to thrive. So when people think, for example, that it's exceptional that a person speaks 10 languages, I would say it's exceptional because just a few people do it, but it doesn't mean that people can't do it. It's just because it's a combination of things. It's like I don't believe in I do believe that talent can play a role, can facilitate the process, but I also believe, because I've seen it firsthand, that and I'm talking about language learning, but this goes for everything. You can do amazing things, or supposedly amazing things, that look amazing, but actually they are within our capacity of our brain's capacity. You know.
We'll talk a little bit about talent. I mean, we did some magic tricks the other night, and I just want to bring that up because you were saying, teach me a trick. Some people show me tricks, they never want to teach me a trick, right? And that's true. There's certain things that I can do with cards that you can do too, and there's nothing particularly talented about them. It's just putting in the time and analyzing where the hands need to be, and analyzing the audience, and doing this and doing that, and saying this at a particular moment and not at another moment. But I think the number one talent is actually sitting down and doing it. So, yeah. But if there were more, what are some of the talents that you think that you have in particular that have gotten you this kind of success, that another person could look at themselves and say, I am lacking in that area, and then they could actually build a talent? Because, we're talking about age and all that stuff. We know that neuroplasticity is a reality, and the brain can change, and certain activities that we engage in can cause new neural networks to form, and that sort of stuff. So what do you think that you have in particular that others may not, that they could then work towards getting in order to to put some stuff in their toolbox?
You ask very interesting questions. I like it. I thinking about language now. Language is a huge field, actually. I would say that the thing I have developed, which maybe differentiates me from other people, might be phonetics, might be the way I pronounce languages. But I don't really know whether I have a talent for that or I have a knack for sounds. I would say, though, that I strongly believe that the reason why I pronounce certain languages well, or supposedly well, that's what people tell me, is that I train. Not just sitting down and thinking, okay, now I'm going to train like this. I train in every possible situation. Think about it. I don't know if you ever talk to yourself. Now, it might sound a little bit crazy, but everybody, in the end, once in a lifetime, they've done it, right?
Talking to myself right now. No, I'm listening to you very attentively.
So, no, the thing is that what I do is, for example, instead of sitting down and thinking, okay, I'm going to, deliberately spend some time doing this on this activity, I just train while I take a shower, or while I go walking. Once I was even in the metro and I really felt like speaking. I couldn't talk to anybody. I just could have come up and said, hey, hi, how are you doing? But strike a conversation and like in a metro would have been a little bit weird unless I had a specific purpose, right? So I just got my phone out of the phone out of my pocket. I just started talking as if we're having a conversation with my girlfriend. I was saying, like I was calling this imaginary girlfriend and talking with her in Dutch, because I wanted to practice Dutch. So I was imagining having I was really literally taking pauses and listening as if I were listening to this person talking to me, and I was replying. So I was imagining this conversation for the purpose of, I was calling her. I remember that I had invented that in my mind, I was imagining her sitting with her friends and talking about stuff. What are you doing? Where are you going? What are you going to do tonight? And all sorts of things. And this helped me actually articulate the sounds. I believe that, I don't remember how many facial muscles we have, but you have to train your facial muscles as well as your mouth, etc. Because it's like sports. When you start jogging, the very first time you go jogging, you're like breathless, and you tell yourself, "Who made me do this?" You're cursing yourself for going to the park. But actually, it becomes easier. Same thing for languages. When we speak languages, we tend to step out of our comfort zone insofar as sounds are concerned, because we have to utter sounds that are completely different. Sometimes they're very, very different and difficult to pronounce at the beginning. But if you do it consistently, it gets easier and easier in a matter of 2, 3, 4 months. And the way to go about this is not just, okay, you can do some work, at home, sitting down. But what counts is that you find a purpose. You tell yourself, I want to communicate a certain idea to somebody, even if it's an imaginary girlfriend that you are talking to on the phone on the metro, and you just talk. People tend to consider, I think this has been my experience, tend to focus too much on the small details, or on the small details, instead of taking a look at the bigger picture. Imagine that you are watching, you're taking a look at a picture, and somebody tells you, you start watching this picture and you focus on the small things instead of figuring out like the message that the picture wants to convey. What I do is, in very specific terms, don't focus on the pronunciation of the single words, but try to utter a sentence. If you want to practice one word, say it within a sentence. This is called a top-down approach, because if you start with a bottom-up approach, what happens if you start with pronouncing single words, then you might pronounce a word correctly, very well, but when you have to chain sounds one after the other in a sentence, then when it gets a little bit difficult. But if you start from the very beginning with short sentences, then it gets better and better. You can start, for example, let's suppose an Italian wants to say something like, he wants to practice the word church, because it's difficult for us to say church. So instead of telling him, try to say church, church, church for 10 times, just try to say, I want to go to the church. You'd practice it a number of times, and then maybe you can make your sentence longer and try to say, I want to go to the church because I want to meet some people, because I love God, etc., etc. So you tend to make this, you start with a short sentence and then you make it longer, so that if you think about it, you're practicing the pronunciation of 10 words instead of just one at a time. It makes a huge difference in the long run.
So what if you do with someone who says, but I can't even get myself to memorize or pronounce I want to go?
What I tell them is that don't think about the fact that you can't memorize, just do it. Meaning, what I would say, the immediate thing that I would say is that remember that you speak your first language. Why do you speak your first language? We talked about in another podcast that languages are just networks. And what I would suggest, and this is my approach, maybe yours is different, memorizing words, but what I do is I always tell them that if they build the network like a spider web, then the flies, which are the words, are going to get stuck automatically in the long run. One concrete example, this doesn't mean that it's necessarily super easy. When it comes to languages, for example, that are very different, like Russian is a Slavic language, so a lot of words have Slavic roots, and they're difficult to remember. But when you start delving into the language, you're just recognizing the small clues that are inside words, and once you memorize that, you can actually it becomes so much easier to memorize other words, because some words even contain other words. Mm-hmm. So when you start at the beginning, when you might struggle a little bit, but if you expose yourself and you still consider the language always as a network, when you read, when you listen, when you talk, etc., things become easier and easier. For example, if you have to remember the word rasprastraione, it's difficult to pronounce it. Rasprastraione.
Rasprastraione.
Yeah, not far. But instead of saying, you can focus on the sound. You can focus on rasprastraione, which means common. But instead of just thinking, wow, this is like a long word, I'm not going to remember, you might remember it now because you're going to commit it to your short-term memory. But then you have to actually remember it when maybe in a couple of days, and then in a conversation it's going to get a little bit complicated. So my suggestion is, even when you have words like that, break them down into shorter pieces. Like, for example, rasprastraione, you can divide it into rasprastraione, and then if you break it down, and then you this is a technique called backchain, you can repeat this word a number of times, and then your brain will actually figure out the elements. One other example is German is very famous for putting words to, you can see these words like they're huge because they're made of 4 or 5 words, but actually if you spot the words that are there, it becomes much easier. They put an S to put these words together sometimes. So if you, everything boils down to how you see things, and if you see this thing, this word, and you tell yourself this is too difficult, you're already lost. You lost the battle. But if you tell yourself, let me look at this word actually. Take 2 seconds to look at the word and tell yourself, actually, this word is not so difficult because, look at this. This is like, spot the S in the case of German, and you will see that the S separates two elements. And then you will see these two elements. And maybe if you know one, you just have to remember the other one. And I always suggest you, this is how I figured out my memory works. My memory works visually, meaning that I can actually, when I'm fairly advanced in a language, I can memorize words also just by listening to them. But normally, I strongly believe that if you want to commit any piece of information to your long-term memory, what you should do is you should try to use all the senses. Not all of them, but like sight. So you have to see the word, then you have to listen to it, then you have to pronounce it. So you're using your mouth, you're using your ears, and then you're using your eyes. And the more you do that, instead of just listening, some people advocate that listening is great. But then if you don't have a base, being able to see the word might help. So I just put all these elements together, and then I don't sing in the shower, I just talk. Some people singing in the shower, just talk, for example, even in the car. I don't know if you ever noticed that some courses just give advice, and they say, maybe when you're driving the car, just talk to yourself. A person might stop just next to you and think you're totally crazy, but maybe you're just talking on the phone. Nowadays, a person talking to themselves, the first thing you're going to see is you're going to try to spot a microphone, or you're just going to try to spot a telephone to see, maybe they're not crazy, they're just talking to somebody. And it turns out to be true like 95% of the time, depending on where you go.
That's hopeful anyway, that they're doing something like that and not talking to themselves. But let me think here. So I'm not going to try and do the tongue rolls, but ras pras traioni.
Yeah, you're right. Figure it out.
Traioni or traioni?
Ras pras traione. Ras pras traione. Yeah.
Okay. So break that down a little bit. When you are learning that, it means common, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So just the process. Just quickly, what you encounter that word. How did you encounter it, or in what context, and then what do you do next, and what's going on?
Very good. Now, what I do is just, if you want to memorize that word, I think that you not only have to understand it, and this is the first process, you first decipher it, you break it down, right? Then to get a text, not a list of words. So you just have to get, to grab a text, and it should be interesting to you, because you don't want to, I believe that one of the reasons why a lot of people fail learning languages at school, and not only at school, is because they tend to be exposed to texts or materials or stuff that they're not interested in. If you're interested in something, think about 5 things you like, and then you just go and look. The internet allows you to search for any sort of material, and then you just get exposed to it, preferably with the audio. And then what I do is, I try to listen, I try to read at the same time, and what I do, for example, I stumble upon a word like rasprastraione. I break it down into parts, The very first phase is to decipher and understand the text, because you can't learn something you don't understand. If you understand, you got a higher chance of retaining the information. And then what I do, I might not delve into this because this is very specific, but what I do is to use a system in which space-time repetition system, but it's not the space-time repetition can work, cannot work, depend. I know that for some people it doesn't work, but it depends on how they do it. They have to personalize this process as well. It's not, if you hear that, okay, the best technique is to have a space-time repetition system in which you have to repeat a word every single day or every 2 days. It doesn't work if every brain is different. And possibly, each and every one of us learns in a different way. So you have to find the best way that adapts to the way you're learning and committing information into long-term memory. And mine was to build a system where I found out the best intervals of time in which I'm not just repeating stuff, but I'm using that word or attacking that piece of information from different angles. One day I read it, one day I listen to it, and one day I use it. And the other piece of advice that I would give is use this thing. Languages have been created to be used. They're, if you can use these things, you're telling your brain that this or that piece of information is important, and the brain's going to retain it. So this is kind of important. So I've built a system in which I tend to, first of all, put myself in the best conditions to understand something, and then to use it, basically, then to review it in a certain way, and then finally to start using it. Obviously, there are some words like распространённый is a common word in Russian, but there are like very uncommon words that you might not use in your lifetime. The reason why we know it as native speakers is because for some reason we've been exposed to them, or when you read, But how many times are we going to use words like great in English? I don't know. It depends, right?
I use it all the time.
Well, you use it all the time, but the point is that everybody is different. So some people, and this I think this has not been tackled anywhere. My way of dealing with words has to do with, I believe that we have this core of words that everybody uses because they're absolutely necessary. You can't avoid using these words. Like, some words might not carry a lot of information, like and, the, on, etc. These are common words. But there are other words that depend on the specific field or your work, on your life, etc. Maybe somebody working in the lumberjack business, for example, might know some specific words that have to do with wood or their specific work. Screwdriver, for example, somebody working in a specific field. Some other people will never use that word. Screwdriver is another common word, but if you think about great, or if you think about things that are very specific, I saw in a forum a person saying, if you don't know these words, it means that, I remember it was hot flashes, Like, I didn't even know it at the time when I saw it, hot flashes. First, I'm not a woman, but
Well, you can get andropause if you're a man.
I can get andropause. Yes, that's true. But I didn't know this word, and I found it a little bit shocking that some people really believe that fluency has to do with. It does have to do with the amount of words you know up to a certain level, because you have to know a lot of words in order to speak fluently. But for some people, advocating that if you don't know like 10 words that are almost never used, or you're it's going to be very unlikely that you're going to hear it, then you don't know the language. If you think about it, even in your English, your native English and my native Italian, we don't know a lot of words. We know actually a tiny fraction of the words that exist in a vocabulary. Is huge, There's hundreds and thousands of words. English has, I don't know how many words, 1 million words? It depends. Obviously, some people want to know all the words, but in most of the times, you don't need to know all the words, but you need to know how to use a tiny fraction of the words that are used that you need that you have to use in order to communicate. So my idea is, what a person should do is to learn how to put them together, syntax, how to structure a sentence, and then you can learn all the words that you want. So to me, is first build a structure and then add the content, the meat.
Well, we're talking about words, and one of the things that I always get asked about is, what do you do if a word has more meanings than one? So, for instance, great, which you were mentioning, can also be too great to make something small, like grated cheese.
Yes.
So, how do you contend with that? Or,
interesting question.
Just because many words have that quality of meaning more than one thing, and they have the technical term for that, speaking of the million words in English, is polysemy. The polysemy of words, the manyness of the semantics. So,
which is another aspect that is quite important. Well, I would say that the easiest way to tackle this is to get exposed to the language as much as possible, because you're going to, with multiple contexts, you're going to see that these words are used in a different way. In languages such as Chinese, for example, they don't have many sounds, and very often a sound, I'm not even talking about a word, a certain sound can mean not only different words, but can be a verb, can be an adverb at the same time, can be a noun, depending on where you find it. So you have to, I think that if you want to tackle this, you better tackle it immediately, and you have to tackle it with a certain mentality, and telling yourself, when I look up a word, don't just restrict yourself to thinking, okay, this word has just one meaning, but go and actually look like dictionaries, like online dictionaries, like such as Word Reference has this, but many dictionaries offer that. Try to see the possible meanings or the possible uses of that word. Just don't. Okay, this word распространенный means common. Got it. You know? No. Try to see it in 2-3 sentences where this распространенный could mean different things. Now, I'm not talking about распространенный, but another word. In English, some words mean a pronoun, can be a verb, can be an adjective, depending on where you find it. So in Italian, it's the same thing. And there are some special cases like in Chinese in which this is particularly important. But the idea, it all boils down to the way, the mentality with which you approach a problem. And if you think that there's just a simple correspondence between one word and the other word in the language, and that one word has just one meaning, then you're missing out of the bigger picture. And this could, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's detrimental, but it can slow you down, because you have to see a language, once again, I know that I insist on this, as a network, so this, like a DNA almost, so a certain piece in a certain position has to be linked to other pieces around it in a certain spot, but it's different in another spot,
So, given this kind of need to see things in a network sort of sensibility, what do you think is the number one thing that people do that prevents them from entering that network, to becoming a part of it, and keeps them outside rather than in the field, so to speak?
There's a number of things that can keep you from figuring that out. First is to consider words as isolated elements of the language. And the other thing is that I think is absolutely important is they don't use the language. They might think, okay, I'm studying this language and using books, but they're not using it. So my piece of advice, especially in languages that are similar to your native tongue, is to start using the language and make it meaningful to you. One of the best ways is to get to know people. And nowadays, even if you live in in Alaska or in Australia or in some places like in a small island near New Zealand, you can still find people on the internet, or people you can talk to, and you better find people you want to talk to. If you stumble upon a person you don't want to talk to, or people who have the same interest, or whatever, what counts is that you're starting using the language, and the language becomes meaningful to you, and all doors open, because your brain is going to absorb the information in a much easier way. If a language is confined within the realm of, just books or things that are not even interesting to you, you're going to struggle. You will see that the moment you start using the language, and using the language, mind you, doesn't necessarily mean speaking the language. You could even just type, or you can listen. There's a number of ways you can translate. You can do a number of things to make it meaningful to you that don't necessarily imply speaking. Well, speaking would be the best option, because by speaking, you reinforce certain mechanisms. Your brain learns how to use the language live with people, and emotions are involved, and it facilitates the process. But you can do a number of things, once again, without necessarily speaking, if you're a shy person, or simply if you don't feel like speaking to somebody.
One thing I've always wanted to ask you, I've actually thought about it before, and it never came up.
Yeah. I'm scared.
Be afraid. Very afraid. No, it came up before, after our second interview, and I just thought, wow, why didn't I ask this? Is, having to do with language coaching and so forth. I wonder if I were an actor, like let's say I was going to be in a new movie with Tom Cruise, and I had a pretty big part, and I needed to speak Russian, right? And I don't want to learn Russian. I just want to be able to look like I can say 12 lines of text, perfect, dead on, and everything, just as if it's just exactly my mother tongue. What would you do in that case? Or would you even touch such a case as a language coach?
Yeah, why not? I mean, anything is feasible. What I would do, first of all, is to teach him how the language works, the basic intonation patterns. It's a very interesting thing that if you think about it, every language has basic intonation patterns and can be reproduced and can be easily spotted if you do a certain training. And this is a training I've been doing for a number of years. in 5, 6 languages. And instead of just telling them, you have this text, learn it by heart, I would tell them, first of all, try to understand why you say things in a certain way. Let me give you an example. If you are an Italian native speaker and you want to learn, for example, a sentence in English, you have to understand why certain things are said in a certain way. If you say, I want to go to church because I like it, you will, instead of telling this Italian guy, okay, just listen to this and say, I want to go to church because I like it, think about it. You say you have two sound units, so to say. So you attach all the words together. The first thing that you say is, I want to go to church, and then you raise the frequency of, the vocal cords vibrate. They have like a certain fundamental frequency. And you go up, and I would tell them the reason why you go up here, and you say, I want to go to church. You can say it in a number of ways, obviously. But the reason why you raise your tone is because you're about to say something else. If you think about it, we constantly raise and lower our tone to convey meaning and to let the other person understand what we're about to say. Every time we raise our tone in certain spots within the sentence, we are actually telling the other person that either we have finished delivering one piece of information or we're about to say something else. All the sentences that have a secondary clause, something like, I want to go to church, but, I want to go to church, and, I want to go to church, although, they have this pattern, for example. So you actually train people. The first thing is I would train people in basic patterns. I would say, every time you say a sentence, I would start with short sentences. You have a point where you have to lower your tone because it's a statement. Any possible statement, unless it's a question, has to end somewhere. So you see the end just by seeing it written, but the end in terms of sound is simply when you lower your tone on a certain syllable within a word, which is very often the last word, but not necessarily, and that means that you have finished. That means that I've finished, and all the rest is slow. So every single sentence, you have to see every single sentence as a message. So for somebody who wants to be a good actor, the very first thing is, what is it that you're trying to communicate? And the thing that you're trying to communicate is a message. And if you have that message, and there are small mini messages inside the message as well. So instead of telling, once again, you have to repeat this by heart, which could be difficult. If you understand something, it's going to be much easier. You first break it down into smaller chunks. You first explain, and then you explain to them why the chunks are pronounced in a certain way. You focus on the chunks and you put them all together. And this is basically how a training works, and works very well if you know how to tackle it. They commit it to long-term memory because if they understood it. You can tell, even if an actor is very good, you can tell that if they speak the language or they don't speak the language. For example, I suspect that you might know the guy. I don't remember his name. Now memory fails me. But there's a very famous movie by, I don't remember his name either. Wait, I'm going to do this I'm going to try to remember. Tarantino. Never remember.
Quentin Tarantino, yeah.
Quentin Tarantino, he made this Inglourious Basterds, and you can tell, I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
And there's this guy who speaks a number of languages. He's a fantastic actor.
Christopher Waltz.
Yes, gotcha. You're a memory guy, so you surely have better memory than I do. As far as, for example, I have a problem with names. I don't remember names, and not because I don't remember them. It's just because I'm not interested. I don't know. They're not. Well, this is another thing. Anyway,
I can help you with that.
You're gonna help me with that. So fixed deal. So we have Christopher Waltz, who speaks a number of languages very well. Like, he recites very well, but I could tell, I suspect, I don't know, I've never looked it up actually, maybe we can do it later, that he speaks French because his French is natural. It doesn't look like, of course it's not perfect, he sounds foreign, but his French is so natural in the way he talks and the way that I suspect that he knows French well, And English, the same thing. Italian, instead, he just recited a couple of lines, but you can tell it's a little bit stiff. So even if he's a very good actor, you can tell. Obviously, it's normal. It's not his native tongue. I don't think it's that easy to pronounce a language perfectly, but I still believe that there are certain things that can facilitate the process. If he had probably understood like how Italian intonation works, and he had put some work, but possibly, a lot of people don't think that it's necessarily important that he speaks like a native, and it adds a flavor to it if you speak like you have a foreign accent. But in that case, I think that for some actors, if they want to recite 12 sentences in a language, I would spend some time in training, 4 5 days in making them understand why things are the way they are, and then things are going to be much easier. And provide a visual aid, visual guidelines. People talk about, they can see the notes when they play the music. When musicians, you can do the same thing for language. You can literally find a system which is consistent. In phonetic books, there are all sorts of systems that can be used, visual systems. But every system is different depending on the author. But what they have in common is that they're consistent. So okay, these are the things. Like for raising tone, you use like something like this. You're going up with a narrow, or you're going down, etc. What other people do, other things. But what counts is that if you have a visual guideline, actually it's going to be very, very helpful for your memory, because you're understanding things, you're breaking things down, and you're going to repeat and produce something that you have understood that has a meaningful message.
Now, we've been talking about acting now, and we talked about magic earlier, and there's an old saying that says that a magician is really just an actor playing the part of a magician. And I wonder to what extent you think that might apply to language learning.
It applies a lot, because the moment I'm talking to you now, for example, in American English, I feel a different person. So you have to be an actor in a way. Obviously, you can't it's difficult to be an actor all the time, because an actor is just reciting, right? But I would say in the big show of life, if you're consistent, you're telling your brain that when you speak the language, you have a certain way of moving and talking to people, etc., etc. And if your brain absorbs it, then actually it becomes easier to be phonetically consistent and to speak in a certain way. Now, if we talk about sounds, because language mainly sounds, they reproduce, but it's always the way we use hands. For example, the way I'm using my hands right now, I would not use them in the same way as if I were speaking Italian. I would go more like crazier. I don't know. But the way I use my eyes, my sound, my eyes, my nose, my tongue, my hands, my body is different. And whenever I speak a language, the amazing thing that happens is that I suspect, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I believe that the reason why I speak in a certain way is the product and the result of the experiences I lived through that specific language. In English, sometimes I say specific sentences in specific situations that I've seen actors use, I've heard actors use in certain movies, for example. So movies and the characters who are in the movies play a role, as well as the people I met in real life. Then they'll contribute to my personality, or I wouldn't go so far as to say personality, but a side of my personality, because I don't believe that speaking a language changes my personality, but actually it shows another side of the personality that I have when I speak another language. So a person is potentially can express all the facets of her or his personality if he spoke a number of languages, and I do believe that's exactly what happens when you speak a language. And the better you speak a language, the more the more evident this becomes. Like in English, I hope I speak English decently. I have this thing. This is very very evident. Like I feel a different person. I'm not a different person, but I feel different because I've lived the language and I have a parallel life. I had my Italian life, but also I had the life I lived through English, which makes a huge difference. It's because of the experiences that I lived.
Well, Your Excellency, your English is excellent.
Oh, thanks.
But it's interesting what you mentioned about gestures, because I don't think I've ever done this nearly as much as I have since living in Germany, because, as a Canadian, we just don't do that much. I'm not sure what the alternative is in Canada. But I wonder, as you've traveled around, lived in these different countries, do you ever feel that you have become less Italian?
Yeah. That's a yes and no. Yes and no. That's a different. This is a difficult question to tackle. I believe that I'm still Italian, but I wouldn't say that speaking other languages made me less Italian, but it made me richer. It made me more. It didn't make me less less Italian, maybe more international. So I'm Italian, but I'm all international. What I would say is that it made me understand, it made me see Italy and Italians and myself and in a bigger framework. So I understand why we say certain things, why we think certain things, and other people think certain things. It made me understand my own country better. It made me more conscious of the person I am living in this world. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that it made me less Italian. No.
It's kind of a weird way to phrase the question. I was just thinking of a friend of mine who told me that when I first moved to New York, he said, 3 months from now, you won't be Canadian anymore. It'll be impossible because the country is flowing. It's in its own zone, so to speak. And once you're out, then you re-enter. It's like, you can't step in the same river twice kind of philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, come on, man, that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I'm Canadian. I'm going to be Canadian for the rest of my life. But 8 years later, I go back to Canada and I have no conception of where. I don't recognize the place anymore, and I don't recognize myself inside of it. It was very what they call reverse culture shock. So I kind of didn't mean to say that less Italian. That was a weird way of phrasing it, but that kind of thing of can you re-enter and have it.
That's a different.
Yeah, you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing that happened after living 3 years in Paris is that I became a little bit more. I wouldn't use the word intolerant, but there are certain things that I cannot stand anymore, that I took for granted. For example, waiting for the bus for 45 minutes without anybody telling you, maybe under the pouring rain, without nobody telling you why that is happening, is very irritating. In France, if something like that happens, people are going, it's going to be a second revolution, French Revolution, and it's very, so there are certain things that I found difficult to accept after living in a country which is, let's face it, more efficient. And first on the one hand, I appreciate some things more because every country has problems and every country has good and bad things. Italians I believe they're wonderful people, but there are some things that could be changed if we and I include myself put some energy and some will into it. There's just no will to change things because Italians say we got the sun, who cares? So in a way, once again, I'm not less Italian. I'm just more conscious of the things that could be better, things that other people might not be conscious of because they've been living in that environment for their whole life. So they don't know that actually things can be different, it can be better. And that's it, I think it made me a richer person, and because I think I can see a problem or a reality from different perspectives, So there's no one bad thing I could say in when somebody tells me, and this is quite common actually. Oh yeah, you're just good if you speak English. If you've been living in Germany for 8 years, right? If I remember correctly.
Well, I've been out of Canada for that long.
Yeah, for a certain amount of time. Would you think that your experience would be the same if you didn't speak a word of German?
I don't know because I do speak. I speak lots of German.
Speak it, but at the beginning, would you think that if you didn't speak a word of German, you wouldn't be able to talk to certain people? And people might speak English to you, but they might be as warm and trustworthy and all sorts of things if you didn't speak their language. There's like this English bubble. People can live here. Obviously, people can understand you. You can order things. You don't need words. You just need your fingers. You just point at things. But speaking the language gives you the experience, and the things you experience are completely different.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question and you probably have this experience as well. Being a second language speaker or third language speaker, you're always speaking in context. There's always a framework around what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So there's something called Amtdeutsch in German, which mm-hmm. is the kind of German that you use in public offices. So when I go to the Ausländerbehörde, which is the immigration office, there's a special kind of German there that mm-hmm. is used. And if you're Canadian, then that special kind of German that you might be struggling through is treated differently than if you're from a poor, impoverished country that, these people struggle to get in. Yeah. So there's that kind of issue that goes on in language learning, and then there's the kind of German that you hear at a donor stand or where you get grilled chickens, and there's just all kinds of different Germans. There's not one German language, and So I wonder what you think about that. That's another piece of the puzzle of language learning, is we treat as if we're learning a language, but each language is languages in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. There's all sorts of languages within language, because in every context you can learn to express yourself in a certain way, or you have to use certain words, and there's registers. You would not talk to your friend, you're having a beer in a bar, and you would not talk to him or her the way you talk to when you go to an office, or when you have to go to university, and you have to talk to your professor, and you have to talk to your friends and family, etc., etc. So there are all sorts of things that you have to understand. It's a cultural, it's about cultural consciousness, because, and this is particularly important for when it comes to languages like Japanese. You can't, in Japanese there are these registers. I believe that in Korean it's even worse. Situation is even worse. People can actually get angry at you unless they understand you're like foreigner, because you're just talking to your professor, as you were saying, hey buddy, what's up? Imagine you walk to your professor and you say, hey buddy, what's up? How's he hanging? Your teacher's going to take a look at you and he's going to say, he's crazy, I'm not going to talk to this guy. Or you're going to fail and flunk the exam, which is a more likely possibility. So yeah, it's absolutely correct that you have to learn that the language you find in a book might not be the language you actually get to hear every day. And actually, that's the reason why people are so important. When you watch a movie and you watch it with a foreigner, when you watch it with a native speaker, it's so enriching, because you might not understand that word or that person, and that happened to me quite a lot of times, and say, this is a common situation. This is the thing that people say in that situation. This is a very common sentence, because everybody knows this movie. So they are helping you understand. Not only, it's called pragmatics, how you're supposed to use a language. Some people might find, they read a book by Oscar Wilde, and they might go on around and talk like the book, like Oscar Wilde, and people obviously would say, you're talking like a book, You're still communicating, but talking like a book is not like talking to like in normal life. So, and this also is kind of important, because I think that one of the very common mistake, is that people tend to focus on things that they're not strictly necessary. If you want to, first you understand your goal. If you actually realize that your goal is the one of communicating with people, it's one thing. If you want to understand and read literature, like ancient literature in a given language, that's another goal completely. So if your goal is to talk to people, just, start talking to people, and they're going to understand, and you're going to realize very quickly what kind of language is being used. Well, the book is something else, or you can do both. A native speaker normally does both, because he has, most native speakers have a certain path. They live within a family, they go to school, they go to university, so they understand all these sorts of things by living the language. But a person who's an adult, or like a second language learner, and who learns a language in a certain way, might actually end up learning just one piece of the language, and and not understanding that actually there are a lot of facets. There's a lot of aspects to a language they're not aware of, and they should be aware of if they want to speak, if their goal is to speak like a native speaker, or speak a language fluently and blend in.
Speaking of speaking like a native speaker, you've got a new course out, which is a masterclass. Could you tell us a little bit about that and the benefits involved in being a student of that course?
I've been teaching, I've been training, I would say, I would use the word train, a lot of students in the last 5 years, but still I'm just one person. So I can help people. I saw how beneficial this can be for people if you just show them the way, I don't know if you've heard of this thing that a great teacher is the one who shows you the way but doesn't tell you what to see. And what I do is like I try to show them the way, but I couldn't help the one-to-one conversation, or one-to-one class is just one-to-one class. So I have in the last 5 years, I've had so many requests from people, and I can't possibly work with everybody because it's impossible. So I told myself the best way to do this is to create a course that people can actually watch, and they can extract information, valuable information. And I basically tackle what I consider the most important things for a language learner to make somebody independent, and to figure out, for example, the things that we've been talking about, to figure out how to decipher intonation, pronunciation with a very special approach, This is one thing. Another thing is how to tackle a conversation, because I believe that holding a conversation is some kind of art, you know? So, and how you can develop your language skills very, very fast by knowing how to use Skype. I believe that Skype is just an instrument, but if you know how to use it, it becomes very powerful, you know? And obviously also the memory thing, you know, how to use your memory efficiently, because one of I think the biggest struggle is to remember words. People want to remember a lot of words, you know, they're like the bricks of the language. They don't know how. And I believe that the reason why a lot of people can't is not because they can't, because they speak their own native tongue, so to speak, thousands of words, is just they don't know how to do it. If you know how to do it, things are much, much, much easier. And I told myself, I figured this out. I want to give this to people because I think that it can be very, very beneficial. You know, I've been seeing governments spend thousands and thousands of euro, and like you go to school for 5 years, you can't string a word together. Why is that? There must be a reason, and the reason is that their people are not trained to learn languages. They're taught a language. I don't believe that you can teach a language. You can't lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink, right? So what I think every school should do, or every institution, is train people to learn, and then you show them the direction. You know, you're not just telling me, you know, going back to what I was saying before, if you tell them what to see, for example, grammar patterns, they're not gonna nail them. They have to understand how to tackle grammar patterns, and they're gonna do them themselves. You know, if you try to teach them, and so I put this comprehensive course together, tackling what I believe the most important things, and especially focusing on training people. And the last thing is, for example, time management. I believe that time management is absolutely important. People don't know how to manage their time. People, me included, sometimes I told myself, I don't have time for this. It's not that you don't have time. Every day you find the time to do something you like. So it's not about having time, it's about finding the time. And if you start, you know, you revolutionize your world, and every time you tell myself, I don't have the time, instead of telling yourself I don't have the time, you say, I didn't find the time, then the next day you might find the time. Tell yourself, you know what? I do have the time, actually. You know, it's just every day you do something you like. Every day you do find the time to listen to music, to take a walk, or whatever. So you can do exactly the same thing for language, and in only 30 minutes a day, or 15 is nothing if you think about it. 15 minutes a day, you can accomplish a lot. And I explain, for example, how to use your time effectively in all sorts of situations, even when you're waiting for the bus. You know, so all these things together, you know, and a lot of people actually watch that masterclass. I'm very happy about it. So.
Yeah, I've taken it myself, actually, and even as, I guess I would say, intermediate language learner, I wouldn't say I'm advanced in that sense, but certainly advanced in the memorization field that goes along with language learning. But I learned a great deal because, and I've been on both sides of the coin, learning in a language class and learning in a self-taught context. And the ideas and the structural, basically, it's not really a system, but there's a systematic element to what you're teaching, where you can help yourself come up with your own system, is very well described and expressed, and just some of the diagrammatic elements that are laid out for you are really fantastic. And I learned a lot and benefited a great deal. And also, I mean, I don't want to embarrass you or anything, but you're a great teacher. You're interesting to listen to. It's fast paced, and there's useful things like that you can take away if you keep notes and revisit the course more than once, because you're not going to get it all in the first time. And I think above all, there's the most important thing, which is the inspiration to take action that you get from going through this and seeing it from a master, the actual procedure that he's used himself. It's not theory that handed down by the government that goes into a classroom from a teacher who's getting paid almost nothing to handle a bunch of of students who don't want to be there in the first place. This is someone who loves language learning, who's demonstrated beyond, the call of duty by helping so many people on YouTube and so forth that this is real and this is a methodology that works no matter who you are or where you are or what your situation is. So I've benefited from it a great deal. I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to do so. So
thanks. I'm glad that you have appreciated it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the website for where people can get a free introduction to the course with a number of videos, so maybe you can share that.
Yes, it's called Master Trait. What do you call it in English?
A dash.
A dash.
Yeah.
Okay. It's called master-any-language.com.
Right. So master-any-language.com, and we're going to have that on the screen as well. And I highly recommend you go and get these free videos. And really, one of the most amazing things I thought is your introduction on that page. You're speaking multiple languages and with subtitles, so you can really see for yourself just how rapidly Luca can switch between these languages and read the message in subtitles if you don't know those languages. And it's one of the best paths that you're going to find in the world that will get you to learning those languages, or even just one language. So I guess my last question would be for you, one that I get a lot is it possible, or is it recommendable, or is it realistic to learn more than one language at the same time?
Absolutely, yes. If you know how to do it, it all boils down to, if you know how to do it and you know how to manage your time, you can do it. I've been learning, 2 languages at the same time since 2008, and there are some guidelines. I even, elaborated on that on my blog, talking about how people can learn 2, 3 languages at the same time. My suggestion is to learn 2 languages at the same time. 3 might be a little bit too much, unless you're a very experienced language learner and driven. But it's absolutely feasible. I see no reason why I could not do that. But once again, it's not just about a matter of learning 2 languages at the same time, but you have to try to find a system where you can maintain the other languages that you're learning. Because one of the things that I heard very often is that, for example, if an American learns Spanish, goes to Spain, he spent 3 years in Spain, speaks Spanish quite well, then he moves to Italy and starts speaking just Italian, then there's gonna be a conflict. And every time, for example, I've heard this a number of times, and that person says, "Oh, now I speak good Italian, but I've forgotten everything about my Spanish." The reason why that happened is because you just stopped speaking Spanish. But if you go to Italy and you, while learning Italian, you find you find a partner and you tend to practice Spanish, then you're going to speak both languages well. So when it comes to learning 2 languages at the same time, remember to structure your time so that you can learn these 2 languages, but you have to maintain the others. This is exactly what I've been doing in the last 20 years. I told myself I'm going to learn a new language every 2 years, but while I was adding languages, I made sure that I kept reinforcing and maintaining and reinforcing the languages already knew. Sometimes even using some languages I had already learned to learn others. It's not true. It's true up to a certain point that the more languages you learn, the faster and the easier it gets. If, for example, the language that you're learning is similar to one of the languages you already learned. If a language is completely different from any language you've ever learned, you're going to struggle at the beginning a little bit because it's completely different. But obviously the more languages you learn, the higher the chance that you're going to, that the language you want to learn is going to be similar to one of the languages that you have, under your belt, so to say, quote unquote. So, to answer your question, it's absolutely feasible to learn 2 languages. There are no limits. The only limits you have are the limits that you have in your mind. But if you break the barrier, anything is possible. It's just the reason why a lot of people think it's not possible is just few people have accomplished supposedly amazing things because they took action to do that.
Well, speaking of taking action, what are you working on now? What's your next steps?
Insofar as language learning is concerned, my next step, and we were just talking about that, is Hungarian, a language that is completely different from anything I've ever learned. I'm going to learn. I'm learning Japanese right now, which is already a big commitment, and my next language is going to be Hungarian, which is and I want to put together other courses which are going to be more specific. And I really have a passion for this. I really believe that to show the way is the best way. And if you can show the way and just you can take a look at, you consider a couple of texts and you show them, for example, how the intonation in Spanish works, that they can tackle any text. So this is one of the things that I would really like to do. One of the projects is to start tackling specific languages for specific learners, because I do believe that everything is relative, as Einstein used to say. And if you're a native English speaker, learning Spanish is going to be different than if you were an Italian speaker. So you have to also consider the relative systems. I see languages as systems. So if you have a certain system, you have to consider that in order to learn how another system works. One of the first things that I do with my students is to show them how if they speak a language I speak, how their language works phonetically, to understand how the other language works, the language they want to learn. And this is very, very important, because if they're conscious of the way their language works, it's going to make things so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been very inspiring and very helpful, filled with lots and lots of valuable information, and I really want to thank you for meeting with me here in Berlin.
Thank you, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, so we'll talk again soon. And for everybody out there, that URL again is www.master-any-language.com. So go and check that out and avail yourself of the free videos that Luca has for you. And we'll talk again very, very soon.